The millionaire's secret was revealed after his maid found an old letter, uncovering what he never wanted to face. Victor Hale's mansion, located in the prestigious neighborhood of Riverview Heights, was a monumental structure, a symbol of the success he had accumulated over the years. Its imposing stone walls and mirrored glass windows made it stand out even in a neighborhood where luxury was the norm. But unlike most of the houses around it, which seemed to pulse with the energy of parties and social gatherings, Victor's mansion was steeped in an almost sepulchral silence. Inside the house, the opulence was equally impressive, but everything felt cold and sterile. The high-end leather furniture, the rare artworks on the walls, and even the crystal chandeliers seemed distant, as if they were part of a museum rather than a home. Victor sat staring out of the window, contemplating the river with tired eyes. His reflection, barely illuminated by the dim light of the overcast day, looked like that of a man much older than he truly was. On his oak desk, next to a pile of work documents he had no strength to review, was a portrait of his late wife, Eleanor. It was an old photo, taken in the early years of their marriage when they still shared dreams and hopes. Now, Eleanor's image served only as a constant reminder of everything he had lost. They say time heals all wounds, but I'm not sure that's true. Some holes are just too big to fill, and every day that passes only seems to widen that emptiness inside me. Eleanor, why did you leave me alone? The more I try to move on, the more I feel like I'm stuck in that last moment, that last conversation we never had. The words left unsaid, the questions I never asked. And now all I have left is silence. The memories of Eleanor haunted him. Not a day went by without him thinking of her. Her smiles, her silent looks, her last months of life, when she seemed more distant than ever. At the time, Victor had been so consumed by business and the constant expansion of his empire that he failed to notice how much she was suffering. He always thought he had time to fix the cracks, time to discover what was troubling her. But in the end, time ran out before he realized what was truly happening. As Victor sank into his usual melancholic introspection, Maria, the housemaid, went about her morning cleaning routine. Maria had worked for Victor for over 10 years, since the early days of his marriage to Eleanor. Her loyalty to the Hale family was undeniable, but unlike many maids, Maria was discreet. She knew the mansion was filled with memories and avoided getting involved or asking questions. However, something was bothering her that day. There was a heavier atmosphere than usual, something that seemed to weigh on the air. As she cleaned Victor's office, her gaze wandered to the bookshelves he rarely touched. Climbing onto a small stool to arrange the higher books, her hand accidentally brushed against an old brown leather-bound volume. The book, seemingly neglected for years, slipped off the shelf, falling to the floor with a soft thud. Maria carefully descended from the stool to pick it up, and as she grabbed the book, something caught her eye. Inside, tucked between the yellowed pages, was an envelope. It was old, slightly crumpled, but still sealed. The name Eleanor Hale was written on the front, in a fine, delicate script Maria would recognize anywhere. Eleanor had a unique way of writing, always with an elegance that reflected her personality. Maria stood still for a moment, her heart racing. She knew she shouldn't meddle with personal correspondence, but Eleanor's name, the woman she had so much respect for, made her hesitate. Victor had never mentioned any letters from Eleanor since her death. What could it be? A farewell letter? A secret he preferred to keep buried? Maria felt a growing sense of responsibility to discover what was inside. It was a mix of curiosity and concern. What if it was something important, something Victor needed to know but had forgotten? I've never heard Mr. Hale mention a letter from Eleanor before, but this one, it seems important. Maybe I should leave it where it was, but what if it's something he needs to know? What if this is the secret he's been keeping so well hidden? Something that still haunts him. After a few moments of indecision, Maria, with trembling hands, carefully opened the envelope. She knew she was crossing a line, but she felt she had no choice. As she unfolded the time-worn paper, Eleanor's words began to take shape before her eyes. The graceful handwriting, but with hints of urgency, was unmistakable. Victor, my love. I know that by the time you read this, I may no longer be here. There's something I never had the courage to tell you. Not out of a lack of love, but out of fear. Fear of how it might affect you. Our son Victor. He lives. I kept him away to protect him, but now I realize I made a mistake by hiding this from you." Maria felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. A son. Eleanor and Victor had a son, and she never knew. What could have led Eleanor to keep such a devastating secret from her own husband? And now, with Victor completely in the dark, Maria knew she had a difficult choice ahead. Should she tell him the truth? She could hardly believe the words she had just read. The weight of the letter in Maria's hands was immense. Her hands shook, and her mind raced in multiple directions at once. She knew she had to tell Victor. But how would he react? Could this be the missing piece to free him from the pain that consumed him? The next morning, Victor Hale's mansion was as silent as ever, but there was a tension in the air that Maria had felt since she woke up. She knew she had to tell Victor about Eleanor's letter. The idea of keeping such a secret, something so deeply important, was unthinkable to her. Yet, the fear of Victor's reaction weighed heavily on her heart. Victor was in the dining room, seated at the massive dark oak table. Despite the luxury around him, the scene was of a man isolated in his own world. The food in front of him was practically untouched, a plate of eggs and toast he had barely glanced at. His eyes were fixed on the newspaper before him, but he clearly wasn't reading. He was lost in thought, as he often had been in recent years. Maria entered the room, hesitant, clutching the letter tightly. She had never seen Victor as vulnerable as in the past few months, and she knew that this revelation could shake his already fragile emotional state even further. In a hesitant tone, Maria said, "Mr. Hale, I found something yesterday while cleaning the office." Victor slowly lifted his eyes, frowning as he noticed the worried expression on Maria's face. She rarely interrupted him while he was at the table, and her nervous demeanor caught his attention. Victor, with a tired but curious voice, asked, "What is it, Maria?" "Something that needs my attention." Maria took a step forward, trying to steady her trembling hands as she held out the letter. "It's a letter from Eleanor. I found it hidden in one of the books on your shelf. I think you should read it." Victor frowned again, his expression shifting from curiosity to confusion. Eleanor's name, spoken in that tone, always provoked a reaction in him, a mix of pain and longing, as if the mere mention of her name reopened poorly healed wounds. He looked at the letter in Maria's hands, and for a brief moment, hesitated. Something inside him knew that whatever was written there could change everything. A letter from Eleanor? "I didn't know such a thing existed. What does it say?" Maria handed him the letter, holding her breath as she watched him unfold the yellowed paper. Victor began to read, his eyes moving quickly over the words written by his wife's hand. Over the next few seconds, his expression gradually changed, from surprise to disbelief, and then to a silent fury. When he finished, his hands were trembling, and he threw the letter back onto the table with a sharp motion. What is this?" Victor said. "A son? No. That's not possible. Eleanor, we never had children. I would have known. She would have told me." The confusion and pain in Victor's voice were palpable. He abruptly stood up, pushing the chair back, pacing as if trying to process the information. The idea that Eleanor could have hidden something so monumental from him was inconceivable. She lied to me. All these years, she let me believe I knew everything about her. How could she do this? Maria stood still, not knowing what to say. She had anticipated an intense reaction, but seeing Victor, usually so controlled and calculated, on the verge of an emotional breakdown was something she hadn't expected. He had always been a man in control, but now, the discovery had shattered him in a way Maria had never seen before. "Mr. Hale, I don't believe Eleanor did this out of malice. Perhaps she did it to protect you." Victor stopped pacing, his breath heavy, as he processed Maria's words. He looked at her, his eyes still filled with disbelief. Victor was trying to control his anger, but he was still shaken. Protect? Protect from what? From myself? From being a father? Eleanor knew I would have accepted anything if it was for her sake. A child would have been the greatest blessing, not something to hide. Maria stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. "I don't know why she hid this, but I can imagine fear was the reason. Sometimes people make choices, difficult choices, thinking they're protecting others when in reality, They're building a wall. Eleanor loved you, Mr. Hale. I don't think she would have done this without a reason. Those words, Eleanor loved you, seemed to pierce Victor's emotional armor. He knew Maria was right, but that didn't make the revelation any less painful. He sank back into the chair, holding his head in his hands, struggling to process the whirlwind of emotions. If I have a son, and he's still out there, alone, I need to find him. But how? It's been so many years. Where do I even begin? Maria, seeing Victor's vulnerability, stepped closer, now more confident in her decision to help him. She knew that, despite the pain this revelation had caused, Victor needed a purpose, something to pull him out of his perpetual state of mourning. We'll find him. We'll start with what we have, the letter, Eleanor's memories. There must be a clue in her diaries, in the places she visited before she passed away. It's not too late, Mr. Hale. Not if I can help you. Victor lifted his eyes to Maria, finally seeing in her not just a loyal maid, but an ally in his journey toward the truth. Maria's presence seemed to calm him, and for a brief moment, he found solace in the fact that he wasn't alone. Victor sat in silence for a long time, Eleanor's letter still open before him. Her words echoed in his mind repeatedly, as if he were trying to find a flaw, an explanation that made sense. The silence in the dining room was almost suffocating, interrupted only by the distant sound of the wind blowing through the tall windows. Finally, Victor stood again, this time with a calm resolve. The pain was still there, as was the betrayal, but now there was something more. A purpose. He couldn't change what Eleanor had done, but he could find his son. He could fill the void she had left behind. You're right, Maria. It's not too late. If I have a son, then I need to find him. I need to know what happened, and why Eleanor thought he needed to be kept away from me. Let's start with her diaries. If there's anything at all, that can lead us to him, I'll find it. The next day, Victor woke early, feeling a new urgency in his chest. The revelation that he might have a lost son in the world had turned his life upside down. The shadows of the past that had always haunted him had now transformed into something more tangible. There were questions that needed answers, and he could no longer afford to sit idly by, paralyzed by pain. The day was gray, with a mist hanging over the Halleport River, almost as if the weather itself reflected the uncertainty of what was to come. Maria, as always, was already at work in the house. She was preparing breakfast, but her mind was elsewhere, still processing everything she had discovered. She knew Victor was determined to move forward with the search, but she also feared what they might find. Eleanor had always been a reserved woman, full of secrets, and the journey to uncover the truth could open even deeper wounds. Victor entered the kitchen, where Maria was waiting with a fresh pot of coffee. He looked more determined, with a tired but focused expression, a stark contrast to his usual posture. He had spent most of the night poring over Eleanor's old papers, searching for something, anything, that could serve as a clue. However, the diaries and letters he reviewed had offered nothing concrete. I spent the night looking through Eleanor's papers, but I didn't find anything useful. It's like she erased any trace of her life before her death. But I know she was hiding something. I can feel it. Maria watched him closely, seeing the weight the last 24 hours had taken on him. Perhaps the diaries and letters you went through don't have direct answers, Mr. Hale, but Eleanor was a meticulous woman. If there's something to be found, it's somewhere she trusted no one else would look. We need to think about all the places she frequented before she passed. Maybe someone saw something you didn't notice at the time. Victor nodded, grateful for Maria's clarity. He knew that alone, he might not be able to think with the precision this moment required. Together, they had a chance of finding the answer he so desperately sought. Later, back in Victor's office, he and Maria began to search through Eleanor's diaries again. The pages were filled with detailed entries about Eleanor's day-to-day life, but something was missing. There was no mention of a child. Then, after several hours of searching, Maria found an entry that seemed oddly out of place compared to the other records. It was a small note, almost imperceptible, in one of the last pages of one of her diaries. Appointment scheduled at Dr. Simmons' clinic. It will be the last time I'll be there. I hope he understands what's at stake. Maria immediately drew Victor's attention to it. Here, Mr. Hale. She mentions an appointment with a Dr. Simmons. Maybe it's important. It seems like she wanted to say goodbye to this place. Victor read the note silently, the name sounding vaguely familiar, but he couldn't quite remember who Dr. Simmons was. Something about the name made his stomach turn. Dr. Simmons. He was her doctor, yes. But Eleanor was always very private about those appointments. I never questioned her, thinking it was something routine. Now I wonder if this doctor knows more than he let on. If he was with Eleanor until the end, maybe he has the answers we're looking for. I think we should start with him. Maybe this clinic has records or something that can give us a direction. Victor agreed. It was the only concrete lead they had so far, and he was willing to follow every thread of hope. Dr. Simmons' clinic was located in an older part of Velmer, far from the glamour of Riverview Heights. The area surrounding the clinic was a stark contrast to the luxury in which Victor had lived most of his life. The streets were narrow, the buildings worn by time, and the red brick facades gave the neighborhood a sense of something forgotten by the city's progress. As they approached the clinic, Victor felt a pang of discomfort. The mere sight of the place brought back memories of Eleanor coming and going, always with a distant look that he now recognized as something deeper than he had realized at the time. The building was small, with a discreet entrance and an old sign indicating the name Dr. Richard Simmons. The interior, however, was well kept, with simple furniture and a welcoming reception. The smell of disinfectant lingered in the air, mixed with the sound of soft footsteps down the hall. They were greeted by an elderly receptionist, who looked at Victor with curiosity, clearly recognizing his name. "Good morning, how can I help you?" Victor took a deep breath, trying to control the tension in his chest. He knew this was a pivotal moment. He couldn't waste this opportunity to get answers. "My name is Victor Hale. My wife, Eleanor Hale, was a patient of Dr. Simmons a few years ago. I need to speak with him about her appointments. It's something important." The receptionist frowned, quickly consulting the computer in front of her, but after a few moments, she seemed hesitant. "Dr. Simmons is in a meeting right now, but I can let him know you've arrived. He'll be available shortly." Victor nodded, thanking the receptionist before sitting down with Maria in the waiting room. The silence between them was heavy, loaded with expectation and anxiety. The soft ticking of a clock on the wall marked the time, each tick amplifying the tension inside Victor. Maria, noticing Victor's nervousness, tried to reassure him, though she herself was anxious about what they might discover. "Whatever Dr. Simmons knows, we'll find out." Eleanor didn't leave many clues, but this is important. It's the first step. Victor nodded, though his heart was beating too fast for any sense of calm to settle in. He knew that no matter how painful the truth was, he had to face it head-on. After a few minutes of waiting, the consulting room door opened, revealing a middle-aged man with a serious expression and graying hair. His eyes were deep, like those of someone who had seen much more than he cared to. Dr. Simmons looked at Victor and Maria for a moment before gesturing for them to enter his office. Dr. Simmons' office was small and austere, with walls lined with shelves full of medical books and files. There was a comfortable chair in front of his desk, but Victor felt no comfort as he sat down. Maria remained by Victor's side, observing everything intently. She knew this was the crucial moment. Dr. Simmons, after sitting down, looked directly at Victor, sensing the urgency in the man's eyes. "Mr. Hale, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. I was your wife's doctor for many years. May I ask what brings you here today?" Victor took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. He held Eleanor's letter in one hand, the paper crumpled by his nerves. "Doctor, my wife hid something from me. Something big. She mentioned in a letter that we had a child. And from what I understand, you know something about it. I need answers." Dr. Simmons remained silent for a few seconds, clearly surprised by the statement. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. "I knew that one day this secret would come to light. But I never thought it would be like this." Victor felt a chill run down his spine. The doctor's words confirmed his suspicions, and the tension in the room became almost unbearable. "What do you mean by that, doctor? You knew about our child and never told me." "Mr. Hale, believe me, I was put in a difficult position. Eleanor asked me for absolute confidentiality about her condition. She was scared, more than I had ever seen. She feared for her life, but mostly for the life of your child. She believed that keeping him away from you was the only way to protect him." Maria, who had been quiet until now, intervened, her voice soft but full of curiosity. "Protect him? Protect him from what? Who would want to harm Eleanor and this boy?" Dr. Simmons hesitated for a moment, seeming to measure his words carefully. Eleanor didn't go into details, but she mentioned that she was under some kind of pressure. There was someone, a powerful figure, who was threatening her. She was determined to keep the child out of harm's way, at any cost. And part of that involved keeping him away from you, Mr. Hale. She believed that the less you knew, the safer he would be. Victor shook his head in disbelief. He couldn't understand why Eleanor would have done this. Even with threats, he had always believed they could face anything together. But now, it seemed that Eleanor didn't share that confidence. Victor felt a mixture of anger and sadness. I could have helped her. I would have protected our child. How could she keep me in the dark like this? Dr. Simmons sighed deeply, understanding Victor's pain. I tried to convince her, Mr. Hale, but Eleanor's mind was already made up. She believed it was best for everyone. She said she was being pressured by forces beyond her control. Victor's frustration grew with every word. He couldn't believe his wife had endured all of this alone. Worse still, he was now confronted with the reality that there was more at play than just the secret of a lost child. There was a much greater danger lurking. I need to know more, Doctor. Where is he? Where did my child end up? Dr. Simmons paused, flipping through some old files on his desk. He pulled out a small piece of paper and handed it to Victor. This is all I can give you. Eleanor mentioned a name. Annabelle. She said this woman knew more than anyone else about the situation. I'm sorry, Mr. Hale, but this is the end of the line for me. Annabelle might have more information about your child's whereabouts. The clue provided by Dr. Simmons led Victor and Maria to the artistic district of Harborview, an area of Velmer known for its art galleries, painter studios, and streets filled with street musicians. The contrast with the sophisticated environment of Riverview Heights couldn't have been starker. Harborview had a unique charm, but also a sense of decay, with old buildings covered in graffiti and small corner shops that seemed to resist the passage of time. Victor was nervous. As he and Maria walked through the narrow, bustling streets, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of secrets Annabelle, a woman he barely knew, held about Eleanor and, more importantly, about his child. The thought that someone else knew more about his own family than he did deeply unsettled him. Maria, observing the area around, this place is so different from Riverview Heights. But I can see why Eleanor might have come here. Harborview has an energy, a freedom. Maybe it was a refuge for her. Victor nodded, but remained silent, focused on his mission. His hands were tense, and his walking pace was quick, reflecting his growing anxiety. Finally, they arrived at Annabelle's studio. It was a small space on the second floor of an old building, with large windows that allowed natural light to flood in. The door was slightly ajar, and they could hear the soft sound of brushes being dipped into paint. Victor hesitated for a moment before gently knocking on the door. Annabelle. The woman on the other side of the door stopped what she was doing and looked in their direction. Annabelle was a middle-aged woman with graying hair tied up in a messy bun and paint stains on her clothes. Her eyes were deep, as if they carried the weight of many secrets. When she saw Victor, a look of surprise crossed her face, but she quickly replaced it with a calculated calm. Victor Hale, after all these years. I wondered if you would ever show up. Victor felt a pang in his chest at hearing his name spoken by someone who clearly knew more than he did about Eleanor's life. He took a step forward, trying to keep his emotions in check. Annabelle, I'm not here to beat around the bush. I need answers. Eleanor left me a letter, mentioning a child. And from what I understand, you know more about this than anyone. Annabelle looked at him with a sad expression, as if she had been expecting this moment for a long time. She motioned for him and Maria to sit down on some worn-out wooden chairs. Annabelle's studio was small, filled with unfinished canvases and paintbrushes scattered everywhere, but there was a chaotic order to the space. Yes, Victor, I knew. Eleanor told me everything. But she was so scared. Not of what you would think, but of what might happen if the wrong people found out about your child. Victor narrowed his eyes, his discomfort growing. What could be so dangerous that Eleanor felt the need to hide her own child from him? Scared? Scared of who, Annabelle? Who would threaten Eleanor to the point that she would keep my own child from me? Annabelle paused, as if trying to find the right words. She was being threatened, Victor, by someone very powerful, someone who didn't want this child to exist. Eleanor believed that if you knew, you'd be in danger too. Maria, who had been silent until then, asked calmly but with determination. But why hide something like this? Why not just run away with the child? Wouldn't it make more sense to protect him far from any threat? Annabelle shook her head, her eyes full of sadness. She tried. She thought about running, but the threats were too real. There were people watching Victor. People who knew too much. And the man behind it all was powerful enough to ruin not just her, but everyone around her. Eleanor told me there was a name, Alistair Vaughan. When Annabelle mentioned the name, Victor froze. Alistair Vaughan, one of the most powerful men in Velmar, owner of vast industrial businesses and a respected magnate, but also someone Victor knew well. They had done business together, attended the same social circles. Vaughan had always been a man of few words, but always seemed to be one step ahead of everyone else. Alistair Vaughan? No, this can't be right. I've known Alistair for years. He never gave any indication that he was involved in something like this. Annabelle looked at him with a bitter expression. You know the public version of Alistair. But Eleanor found out more than she should have about him. He was involved in shady business, and when she knew too much, he threatened her. He threatened to destroy everything she loved if she didn't stay silent. And she believed that if your child were revealed to the world, he would become the target. Victor felt the weight of the revelation hit him like a blow. It all made sense now. Eleanor's distance in those last months, her strange behavior, the constant fear in her eyes. He had been blind to the reality, and now it was too late to fix the past. Suddenly, Maria, who had been watching the street from the studio window, frowned as she saw a dark car parked across the street. That car seemed familiar, as if it had been there since they arrived. She felt a chill run down her spine. Victor, that car. I think we're being watched. Victor quickly looked out the window and saw the same dark car that Maria had noticed. He felt a surge of fear and adrenaline course through his body. They were no longer safe. Whoever was after Eleanor was still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Maria, we need to get out of here. Now. Annabelle looked at them with a look of panic. She knew that car was a sign they were getting too close to the truth. If they're following you, Victor, it means you're on the right path. But it also means you're in danger. They'll do anything to stop you from finding the truth. Victor grabbed Maria's arm, pulling her out of the studio in a hurry. Annabelle followed them to the door, watching with concern as they ran toward the car. The sound of the dark car's engine starting echoed through the narrow streets, and the tension escalated. Victor and Maria ran to their car parked on a narrow street. The air was cold, but the sweat on Victor's hands was visible. He knew that the moment he put the key in the ignition, he would be involved in something far bigger than any business negotiation or financial decision he had ever faced in his life. This was personal, visceral, and the shadow of Alistair Vaughan loomed ever larger. The car engine roared as he accelerated, trying to pull out of the small parking spot. Maria nervously watched the rearview mirror, seeing the dark car following them. They're following us. What do we do now? Victor glanced at the rearview mirror and saw the black car moving, slowly but determinedly behind them. His muscles were tense, his heart raced, but he knew he couldn't afford to lose control. We're going to lose them. I know the streets of Harborview. I hope they don't know them as well. As the car sped up, the chase began to gain momentum. The narrow streets of Harborview, filled with pedestrians and cyclists, were a challenge for any driver, and Victor did his best to dodge people and parked cars while increasing his speed. The black car followed closely, gaining ground with every turn Victor made. The tension in the air was almost palpable, and Maria gripped the arms of the chair, her gaze fixed on the car behind them. Victor, they're getting closer. We can't keep this up for much longer. Victor looked at her briefly, seeing the fear in her eyes, but also the determination. He knew he couldn't let panic take over. He had to think fast. They reached a wider, less crowded street. Victor took the opportunity and sharply turned the wheel, entering an almost invisible alley between two buildings. The wheels screeched on the asphalt, but the car managed to squeeze through the narrow passage. If we can get through here, maybe we can lose them. The black car tried to follow, but the alley was too narrow for it. When Victor and Maria reached the end of the passage, they heard the sound of the pursuing car's brakes. They had gained some time, but they knew they were not safe yet. When they finally reached a quieter street, Victor parked the car in a small cafe at the edge of Harborview, still trying to catch his breath. They sat in silence for a moment, just breathing deeply, trying to compose themselves. I think we lost them. For now. Maria was still looking back, as if expecting the black car to appear at any moment. For how long? These people won't stop, Victor. If Alistair is involved, he'll chase us until we have all the answers, or until we're silenced. Victor knew she was right. Alistair Vaughn wasn't a man who gave up easily, especially if his illegal actions were at stake. Now he wasn't just dealing with the truth about his son, but also with a threat that could destroy them all. Inside the cafe, the atmosphere was cozy and warm, a stark contrast to the tension they had lived through in the past few hours. Victor and Maria sat in a discreet corner, away from the windows, and ordered coffee, trying to calm their nerves. And now? How do we face someone like Alistair Vaughn? He has money power. He could make us disappear without anyone noticing. Victor looked at the coffee in front of him, reflecting on the raw truth in Maria's words. Alistair was a dangerous man. But Victor also knew he had something Alistair couldn't control, the truth. He had Eleanor's letter, and if he played his cards right, he could force Alistair to back down. We don't have many options. I'm going to confront him. He needs to know that I won't back down. If Alistair thinks he can intimidate me, he's very mistaken. Maria looked at him, surprised by the boldness of the statement. Confront him? Victor, are you sure? If you confront him without concrete evidence, he can simply deny everything. Or worse, he might act against us. Victor nodded, acknowledging the risks. But he also knew he couldn't just sit still, waiting for Alistair to make the first move. He needed to take control of the situation. I have Eleanor's letter. That's proof that he threatened her. And if necessary, I'll take this to the press. I'll expose what he did. Maria remained silent for a moment, considering Victor's plan. She knew confronting him was dangerous, but she also knew Victor was determined to protect his son, no matter the cost. If you're going to confront him, I'm coming with you. I won't let you face this alone. Victor looked at Maria, surprised but grateful. He hadn't expected her to get so involved, but he knew her presence gave him strength. Thank you, Maria. I don't know what I would have done without you so far. The decision was made. Victor would confront Alistair Vaughn, but he knew he would need a solid plan and all the courage he could muster. A few days later, Victor arranged a meeting with Alistair Vaughn at his luxurious office in downtown Velmer. Alistair's building was a monolith of glass and steel, a demonstration of power and success that made him one of the most respected men in the city. But behind that impeccable facade were dark secrets, secrets that Victor was about to confront. When Victor entered the office, Alistair was sitting at a large wooden desk, looking out at the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. He slowly turned when he saw Victor enter, a cold smile forming on his lips. Victor Hale. I wasn't expecting to see you so soon. What brings you here? Some business matter, perhaps. Victor knew Alistair was just playing with him. He took a step forward, his posture firm, but his heart raced. I'm not here for business, Alistair. I'm here because I know what you did to Eleanor. I know you threatened her, and I know you're involved in the story of our son. Alistair showed no visible surprise. He simply looked at Victor with a bored expression, then slowly stood up, walking over to the bar in the corner of the room where he poured himself a glass of whiskey. Eleanor, a very complicated woman. I respected her, you know, but she was meddling in matters that didn't concern her. I did what was necessary. Victor felt a wave of anger rise in his throat, but he controlled himself. He knew Alistair was trying to provoke him. You destroyed her life. She lived in fear, hiding our child from me. But it ends here. I'm going to expose you, Alistair. I have Eleanor's letter, and I'll make sure everyone knows what you did. Alistair chuckled softly, a sound that made Victor's skin crawl. He took a sip of his whiskey before speaking again. You think a letter will destroy me, Victor? You're playing a dangerous game. But if you're willing to continue, well, let's see who wins. After the tense confrontation with Alistair Vaughn, Victor left the luxurious office with his heart pounding. He knew the confrontation wasn't over yet. Alistair wasn't the type of man who would let threats go unnoticed. Every step Victor took was weighed down by the knowledge that he and Maria were more exposed than ever. Victor, thinking to himself as he descended the elevator, this won't end well. Alistair isn't the kind to back down. And now he knows I won't give up. When he reached the ground floor, Maria was already waiting outside the building. She immediately noticed the tension on Victor's face. What did he say? Did he confess? Victor shook his head, exasperated. He didn't deny anything, Maria. Alistair is colder than I imagined. He won't stop. And if I continue, he'll try to silence me. Both of us. Maria felt the weight of Victor's words. While she had been prepared for danger, hearing it made everything much more real. They were dealing with an extremely powerful man, and the threat of retaliation was inevitable. So, what do we do now? We can't back down. If he's capable of all this, then we can't let him win. Victor looked at Maria, admiring her courage, but also knowing they needed to be smart. They couldn't just go after Alistair head-on, not without more proof or a more solid plan. We need to find out more. Annabelle mentioned that Eleanor knew too much about Alistair's dirty business. If we can prove that, we'll have more than just the letter. We'll have enough evidence to take him down. Maria nodded, understanding the plan. But there was a problem. Finding that evidence could put them in even greater danger. Back at Victor's mansion, he and Maria began organizing their next steps. The house, which had once been a refuge of peace for Victor, now seemed surrounded by invisible threats. He knew Alistair could be watching their every move, waiting for the right opportunity to act. Eleanor was always meticulous. If she knew something that could destroy Alistair, I'm sure she hid that information somewhere safe. Maria watched as Victor rummaged through old documents, notes, and letters. She knew that if there was anything else, it would be well hidden, just like the letter she had found. Suddenly, Maria remembered something Eleanor had mentioned briefly during their past conversations. Wait. Victor, I remember Eleanor talking about an old house where she used to spend time alone. She said it was the only place where she could think clearly. Maybe she left something there. Victor frowned, trying to remember the house. The country house, of course. She inherited it from an aunt. It's located on the outskirts of Velmer. Eleanor used to spend weekends there alone sometimes. I never understood why, but now it makes sense. Maria and Victor agreed that the country house was their next step. It was possible that Eleanor had hidden evidence there, far from Alistair's watchful eyes. The next day, Maria and Victor hit the road to the country house, located about an hour outside of Velmer. The weather was gloomy, with thick clouds covering the sky, giving the trip a sense of urgency and impending danger. The country house was an old structure, isolated, surrounded by tall trees and an unsettling silence. As they arrived, the wind seemed to whistle through the windows, creating a tense atmosphere. Victor couldn't remember the last time he had been there, but the place was exactly as Eleanor had left it. Looking around, taking in the atmosphere, Maria said. She probably thought this was the only place where no one could find her. Victor nodded, realizing that Eleanor had kept this place as her sanctuary, perhaps the only place where she felt truly safe. Inside the house, they began searching for anything that could provide clues. Victor knew that if Eleanor had evidence against Alistair, it would be hidden, but in a place accessible only to someone who knew her habits and secrets well. After hours of searching, it was Maria who found something peculiar. On one of the shelves in a small living room, a book caught her attention. The book seemed out of place, a thick volume with a red cover that didn't match the other older worn-out books on the shelf. Victor, I think I found something. She pulled the book off the shelf, and as she opened it, an envelope fell out. Victor quickly approached, catching the envelope before it hit the floor. He opened it with trembling hands, and to his relief, found documents inside, papers that seemed to directly incriminate Alistair Vaughn. Victor, reading through the documents quickly, realized, These are contracts and correspondences between Alistair and other businessmen. It looks like Eleanor got proof of his dirty dealings. This is more than enough to take him down. Maria looked at Victor, a mixture of relief and fear in her eyes. They had found what they needed, but it also meant they were even more vulnerable now. As they packed the documents, something outside the house caught Maria's attention. She looked out the window and saw a dark car parked in the distance, almost hidden by the trees. Victor, that car. I think we were followed. Victor walked over to the window, his heart racing as he saw the same car that had followed them in Harborview. They weren't alone, and now that they had the evidence, Alistair had probably sent someone to make sure it never saw the light of day. We need to get out of here. Now. They quickly grabbed the documents and ran to the car, but they knew the situation was getting more dangerous by the second. As they drove away from the country house, Victor realized the dark car was following them again. As Victor drove down the winding road that led away from the country house, the dark car behind them sped up, trying to catch up. The air inside the car was thick with tension, and Maria held the documents tightly in her lap, as if they were the only thing keeping them alive. Victor's eyes were fixed on the rearview mirror, his mind racing to find a way out of the situation. Maria, looking nervously at the car behind them. They're not going to give up, Victor. We need to hide, or find somewhere safe. Victor gripped the steering wheel, his breath heavy. He knew they couldn't keep running forever. They needed a plan. And fast. There's a shortcut up ahead. If we can get into the narrower streets of the city, maybe we can lose them. He accelerated, guiding the car around a sharp curve that led to a smaller, tree-covered road. The dark car tried to follow, but the speed at which Victor maneuvered left the pursuers behind, at least for the moment. But he knew they weren't safe. Even if they managed to lose the car, Alistair Vaughan's network of contacts was vast, and he wouldn't stop trying to eliminate them. Victor was determined to survive, but he knew every decision now was critical. Victor and Maria managed to lose the car for a while and decided to hide in a small, discreet hotel in the outskirts of the city. As the silence of the night fell, they knew they were running out of time. Maria sat at the edge of the bed, holding the documents. We have enough here to destroy Alistair, but we need to do it smartly. If we go to the police, there's a chance Alistair has someone on the inside. And if we go to the press, he could act before the story gets published. Victor stood by the window, watching the deserted street outside, his heart racing. He couldn't stop thinking about his son, Gabriel, the young man he had never met, who Eleanor had tried so hard to protect. My son. If Alistair knows we're after him, he'll try to find him before we can. We need to be faster. And we need to protect Gabriel. Maria, in a firm tone, said, "He's not alone, Victor. You found him now, and we'll do whatever it takes to protect him. But we need to act. What are we going to do?" Victor took a deep breath. He knew he couldn't wait any longer. The evidence they had was damning, but they needed to ensure Alistair didn't reach them before they could expose the truth. Victor and Maria knew they needed help to get the information out safely and quickly. They decided to meet with Annabelle again to discuss the next step. She had contacts in Harborview, independent journalists who weren't afraid to challenge Velmer's corrupt system. However, Annabelle also knew the risks. When Victor and Maria arrived at her studio, Annabelle was visibly worried, her eyes revealing that she was aware they were now on the edge. "You know Alistair won't take this lying down. He has people watching every corner of this city. But if you're determined to expose this, I know a journalist who can help. He's not afraid to take risks, and he's written about the hidden crimes of Velmer's elite before." Victor looked at Maria, who nodded in agreement. They had no choice. If they wanted to take Alistair down, they needed to involve the press in a way that he couldn't stop. "We need to find this journalist. And quickly. The longer we wait, the more dangerous Alistair's next moves will be." Annabelle picked up the phone and made a quick call. The name she mentioned, Lucas Carter, sounded familiar to Victor. Lucas was known as a fearless journalist, with a reputation for exposing powerful figures in Velmer. He would be the perfect ally, as long as they could trust him. While Annabelle arranged the meeting with Lucas, something unexpected happened. A noise from outside the studio caught Maria's attention as she looked out the street through a partially open window. She saw the glow of headlights moving, and her intuition immediately alerted her that something was wrong. "Victor. I think they've found us again. There's a car approaching slowly." Victor's heart raced. He knew there was no more time for conversations. Alistair had sent his men, and now they needed to get out, fast. "Annabelle, we need to leave. Now. We can't risk Alistair or his men finding us before we get these documents to the press." Annabelle quickly nodded, grabbing her bag with the essentials to leave the studio. They hurried to the back exit of the building, trying to avoid the car that was now clearly parked outside, with its occupants watching every move. As they sneaked through the back street, Maria noticed a dark figure stepping out of the car, starting to walk toward the studio. "They're following us. We need to lose them again." The group ran through the dark alleys of Harborview, trying to avoid their pursuers. The quick steps of their enemies echoed in the distance, and the tension was palpable. They were in a race against time. They needed to find Lucas Carter and get the evidence in his hands before they were caught. After escaping the pursuers, Victor, Maria, and Annabelle finally arrived at the meeting point with Lucas Carter, a small, discreet bar on the outskirts of Velmer. The place was dimly lit, full of smoke, and with patrons who seemed more interested in remaining anonymous than socializing. Lucas Carter was sitting at a table in the corner, his lean figure looking tired, but his eyes showed the sharpness and suspicion of a journalist who had seen it all. "So, you've got something worth telling? I hope you're not wasting my time." Victor sat at the table, feeling the pressure increase. He placed the documents on the table, his voice calm but full of determination. "This will bring down Alistair Vaughan. Proof of his illegal business dealings, contracts, correspondences. Everything you need to expose the man behind a corrupt empire. Lucas quickly flipped through the documents, and his expression shifted from skepticism to surprise. He knew what was in his hands was explosive. This is bigger than anything I've ever written. If we manage to publish this, Alistair Vaughan won't know what hit him. Victor felt a momentary relief, but he knew the work was far from over. In the small bar, Lucas Carter carefully reviewed the documents, but the tension in the air was palpable. Victor and Maria watched the journalist closely as he flipped through the pages, growing more convinced that they were about to bring down one of Velmer's most powerful men. The silence was broken only by the background noise of the bar, where muffled conversations and the clinking of glasses echoed. Lucas finally spoke with determination. This here is enough to destroy any man's career, especially someone with the public profile of Alistair Vaughan. But we need to be careful. If we publish this recklessly, he might try to legally block the story or worse, come after us before it spreads. Victor nodded. He knew it was a race against time. Alistair Vaughan had eyes and ears all over the city, and the longer they waited, the greater the risk of being silenced before they could act. We need to make sure that when this story comes out, it's impossible for him to block. Someone like Alistair has a lot of resources. He'll try everything to stop us. Lucas thought for a moment, his mind clearly working quickly. I have some contacts in the international press. If we can get this published outside of Velmer first, he'll have a much harder time containing the damage. But we'll need to move fast. Maria, who had been silent until then, looked at Victor with a mix of concern and determination. If we do this, we need to be prepared for the consequences. Alistair will come after us, and he might be more aggressive now. Victor knew Maria was right. The closer they got to the truth, the greater the risk. But he also knew that once the story was published, there would be no turning back. As they planned their next steps, Victor couldn't stop thinking about Gabriel, his son, who still knew nothing. Victor's anxiety grew as he realized that if Alistair found out about Gabriel's connection to him, the young man could be in danger. I need to tell Gabriel what's happening. He can't be caught off guard. If Alistair finds out who he is, he could be the next target. Maria agreed, knowing this was inevitable. They couldn't keep Gabriel in the dark for much longer. He needed to understand the gravity of the situation. That same day, Victor and Maria went to Gabriel's house in the modest neighborhood where he lived. Victor still felt nervous around his son, unsure of how to bridge the years that had separated them. When Gabriel opened the door, confusion was clear on his face. "Dad? What's going on? You look worried." Victor sighed, knowing that what he was about to say would change Gabriel's life forever. "Gabriel, there's something you need to know. Something your mother tried to protect you from for many years. But now we can't hide it anymore. There's a man, Alistair Vaughan. He's behind many horrible things, including threats to your mother. And now, we have proof that he's responsible for much more." Gabriel frowned, incredulous. "Alistair Vaughan? I've heard of him. He's one of the most powerful men in Velmer. But why would my mother be involved with someone like him?" Victor felt the weight of his next words. "Because you, Gabriel, are what he fears the most. He knew that if your existence were revealed, it could jeopardize his business and his reputation. Your mother kept you a secret out of fear that he would come after you." Gabriel stood in silence for a few moments, processing what he had just heard. The reality that his entire life had been shrouded in secrets and threats began to form in his mind. "So, I'm the reason for all this? I'm the reason why my mother lived in fear?" Victor shook his head, taking a step forward and placing his hand on Gabriel's shoulder. "No. The reason is Alistair Vaughan. He's the only one to blame here. But now we have a chance to expose all of it, and I promise you I'll do everything I can to keep you safe." Gabriel looked at his father, finally understanding how dangerous the situation was, but also realizing that his father was willing to fight for him. "I want to help," Gabriel said. "If there's anything I can do to end this, then I'll do it. I'm not going to sit on the sidelines anymore." Victor felt a surge of pride and emotion hearing Gabriel's words. He knew this wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that together, they could face Alistair. However, as Victor and Gabriel talked, Maria, who had been watching the street through the window, saw something that made her blood run cold. Two men had stepped out of a car parked across the street and were walking toward the house. "Victor, we've got company. Two men, and they don't look friendly." Victor immediately went into alert mode. He knew there was no more time for conversation. Alistair had sent his men, and now they needed to leave, fast. "Gabriel, you need to trust me. We're leaving now." Without hesitation, Gabriel agreed, and the three quickly exited through the back of the house. Alistair's men noticed the movement and began following them, but Victor and Maria were determined not to be captured. The chase through the narrow streets of the neighborhood intensified. Victor knew they couldn't keep running for long, but they needed to find a safe place to plan their next move. Finally, after managing to lose the men, Victor decided the only way to stop Alistair once and for all was to confront him directly, this time with Gabriel by his side. He knew Alistair wouldn't hesitate to go after Gabriel, and it was time to end this. With Lucas Carter ready to publish the story, Victor arranged a final meeting with Alistair, this time not in a luxurious office, but in a more neutral location, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Elmer. When Alistair arrived, he was accompanied by his security guards, but the expression on his face showed that he knew things had changed. He no longer had full control of the situation. "Victor, do you really think you can beat me? I've been through much worse than this." Victor, with the documents in hand, took a step forward. "You may have escaped before, Alistair, but not this time. I have everything I need to expose you. And now, the world will know who you really are." Alistair remained silent for a moment, his eyes assessing the situation. He knew he was cornered, but he still had one last card to play. "You can try, but I still have enough power to destroy you and your family. Don't forget that." It was then that Gabriel stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Alistair. "You won't control us anymore. No matter what you do, we won't give up." Alistair looked at Gabriel, realizing that the young man he had feared so much was now standing before him, ready to face him. The abandoned warehouse was shrouded in shadows, with only a few faint lights illuminating the space. The silence was broken only by the echo of Alistair Vaughan's firm steps as he approached Victor and Gabriel, his security guards close behind. Victor, with the incriminating documents in hand, was prepared to end this dispute once and for all. He knew the truth was about to come out, but the danger was still present. "You've always been a determined man, Victor. But this isn't going to end well for you. You don't know who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Alistair. A man who built his empire on lies, corruption, and fear. But this time, you're not going to escape the consequences." Alistair took another step closer, his arrogant posture still unshaken. He looked at Gabriel, sizing him up with a mixture of disdain and caution. "So this is the son you've protected so fiercely. I thought he would be more impressive. But honestly, I don't see what's so special about you, boy." Gabriel felt the fury rise inside him, but he kept calm. He wouldn't let Alistair's provocations throw him off balance. "You're afraid of me because you know I represent everything you can't control. And now I'm here, ready to face you." Alistair chuckled softly, but his eyes revealed that he knew the situation was quickly deteriorating. Victor raised the documents in his hand, delivering the final blow. "These documents will destroy you. Lucas Carter is already ready to publish everything. Your business, your crimes, your threats. When this comes out, you'll be finished." Alistair's smile faded for a brief moment. He knew Victor was telling the truth, and for the first time, Alistair's unshakable confidence began to falter. He had underestimated Victor and Gabriel. But Alistair, being the manipulator he had always been, still had one last move. He discreetly signaled to his security guards, who began advancing toward Victor and Gabriel, ready to intimidate them and recover the documents. As the security guards moved forward, Victor knew the final moment had arrived. He quickly passed the documents to Maria, who had been watching everything closely from the side, and whispered for her to run to the car. She immediately understood the gravity of the situation and began moving discreetly toward the exit of the warehouse. "Get ready, son. Things are going to get messy." Gabriel nodded, his breath heavy, but his posture showed he was ready to fight. As the guards approached, Victor and Gabriel defended themselves as best they could, using crates and other objects in the warehouse for protection. The blows exchanged were quick and brutal, but Victor knew they couldn't keep up the fight for long. Maria, with the documents in hand, managed to escape through the back door and ran toward the car. Outside, the night was silent, but she knew every second counted. She needed to get those papers to Lucas Carter before Alistair could act. Meanwhile, inside the warehouse, the fight continued. Gabriel managed to knock down one of the guards with a strong punch, but the other was still active. Alistair, however, began to realize that his plan was falling apart. He hadn't expected so much resistance from Victor and his son, and now his options were running out. You think you can beat me? I have power, resources. You are nothing compared to me. You may have power, but you no longer have the truth on your side. It ends here, Alistair. With one final effort, Victor and Gabriel managed to neutralize the guards. Alistair, now alone, took a few steps back, realizing he was cornered. As Alistair looked at Victor and Gabriel, trying to regain his composure, the sound of sirens in the distance began to echo through the dark streets of Velmer. Lucas Carter had acted quickly. With the evidence in hand, he had already alerted authorities and journalists from outside the city. Alistair Vaughan's downfall was imminent. You won't be able to maintain this. I still have friends. I still have power. This isn't the end. Victor stepped closer to Alistair, his eyes fixed on the man who had destroyed his family. This is the end, Alistair. You won't hurt anyone anymore. My wife lived in fear because of you. But it ends now. Alistair gave Victor one last look before finally turning, with no choice, and walking out in silence as the sirens grew louder. Outside, Maria was waiting with the documents, and Lucas Carter was ready to release the story to the public. The news would be published within hours, and Alistair's career, along with his criminal empire, was about to crumble. In the days following the exposure of Alistair Vaughan, Velmer was rocked by an unprecedented scandal. Alistair was arrested, and his allies fell with him. The evidence provided by Victor, Maria, and Annabelle had unraveled a web of corruption that had quietly ruled the city for years. Victor, for his part, was beginning to find a new purpose. He and Gabriel were finally connecting, rebuilding the relationship they had never had the chance to develop. Though the traumas of the past were still present, both knew they had the opportunity to create a future together. Victor, sitting in the garden of his mansion, said to Gabriel, "I know we can't recover the time we lost, Gabriel. But I want you to know I'm here for you now. And I'll do whatever it takes to be the father you deserve." Gabriel, who was still processing everything that had happened, smiled at his father, with a look of hope in his eyes. "I want that too, Dad. Let's start over." Maria, who was nearby, watched with satisfaction. She knew she had been a fundamental part of that journey, and she had helped restore truth and hope to the Hale family. With the fall of Alistair Vaughan, Velmer began to rise again. The people of the city finally learned the truth about the corrupt businesses that had ruled in silence for so long. Lucas Carter became a local hero for exposing Alistair's secrets, but he knew that the true heroes of that story were Victor, Maria, and Gabriel, the ones who had fought to bring the truth to light. Victor, now with Gabriel by his side, was determined to use his power and influence to make Velmer a better place, where fear and corruption would no longer reign. And though the scars of the past were deep, he knew there was hope for the future. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episodes and discover how this, and other stories, are connected here in Velmer. Leave a like and comment to let me know what you think.